This is pretty exciting stuff. But did it happen? Is it canon? No. So let's talk a little bit about canon when it comes to fiction. Welcome, my friends, welcome to stately Von Manor, where we have a very scholarly discussion today, where we're talking about canon in fiction and whether we should even care if something like this really happened in this case, the Star Trek universe. Of course, nothing in Star Trek actually happened. It's all make-believe. But what's part of the official Star Trek story and what's not? And what's part of the Star Wars story and what's part of the Sherlock Holmes story and all of those stories or series of stories? And should we even care about, whether something officially happened in this storyline or not? A lot of people seem to really, really care. I mean, a lot. And the subject of canon, the idea of it, is something you hear a lot more now than I used to. I used to hear the word canon only applied to Sherlock Holmes. This was decades ago. Sherlock Holmes is a character that, ever since Sir Arthur Conan Doyle created him, other writers have been writing stories about Sherlock Holmes. And so it was important to differentiate what officially happened in Sherlock Holmes' fictional life and what didn't, since so many people were writing about Sherlock Holmes. And so that's how I used to hear about the word canon back in the olden days. And this is something that's happened to a lot of different characters over time in literature. If a character has become popular or a character's world becomes popular, readers want more of that character or that world, and so other writers will continue the story, usually at the behest of a company that might own the characters, or very often anyway. Sometimes it's just the sheer enthusiasm of the person writing the story. They love the characters so much they want to continue the stories. So we have things like fan fiction and published works, which are kind of often official fan fiction. When it comes to literary characters that are in books, it's often pretty clear-cut what is canon and what is not. First of all, should we even care? Should we even care about this question? Like I said, it's a question that comes up a lot nowadays. Mostly I hear it in regards to Star Trek and Star Wars and other things like that. But as far as in books, should we care? I think we should. And you might say, why? I mean, it's all just make-believe stuff. Well, here's the thing. Stories are important. Stories are important. They're important to us. And it's good to know what happens in a story or what happened in a story or a series of stories. A series of stories is all kind of part of one story. And it's important to know, okay, what happened here in this story so you can follow along, particularly if you really like this story a whole lot or like the characters in the story. And also it has to do with respect for the creator of this story. So when it comes to Sherlock Holmes, for example, the only person who could write a real canon Sherlock Holmes story is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He created Sherlock Holmes. The Sherlock Holmes stories were his creations. And everything he wrote about Sherlock Holmes in the Sherlock Holmes series is canon. That's what really happened to Sherlock Holmes according to the official real stories. Of course, this does not stop every other writer in the world, or millions of other writers anyway, it seems like, to write Sherlock Holmes stories. I mean, there have been Sherlock Holmes pastiche stories written since the time that Sherlock Holmes was first was first created, practically. And now, if you go to a bookstore, you very often will see more Sherlock Holmes pastiche fiction than you will the original stories by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And that's fine. I mean, you could read pastiche fiction as much as you want. I mean, that's fine. You can enjoy that stuff. But it's not Sherlock Holmes. It's not the real Sherlock Holmes. It's not. The only person who could write a real Sherlock Holmes story is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Usually when it came to that, no one really tried to pretend that pastiche Sherlock Holmes was the real deal. Although that has happened. I'm thinking of one of my favorite characters, of course, Conan. When Conan was first published in hardback and paperback, L. Sprague de Camp, the science fiction writer L. Sprague de Camp, didn't just edit those stories. He tried to, well, he did. He slipped in his own stories as additions to the canon and tried to pass those off as kind of official Conan stories. They weren't. They were not. The only person who could write a real Conan story is Robert E. Howard. But he did, and plenty of others have. There have been a lot of Conan pastiche stories. Like Sherlock Holmes, there have been a lot more pastiche Conan stories than there have been original stories by Robert E. Howard. But the only person who could write a Conan story for real was Robert E. Howard. And that goes for most other literary characters that you can think of. A lot of these characters are owned by corporations, or some of these characters are owned by corporations. Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated comes to mind. Edgar Rice Burroughs, who created Tarzan and John Carter of Mars and all these other great adventure science fiction-y type series, he created his own shared universe of characters. They all existed in the same universe, which is a fictional device we see a lot nowadays. And now Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated is putting out novels in that universe. So, and as far as I know, they're all good and they're all written by people who respect Edgar Rice Burroughs. But are they part of the canon? No, because the only person who could add to that canon was Edgar Rice Burroughs. It was his series, and he's dead. You could read them as you like, but they're not, no matter what anybody says, they're not official Edgar Rice Burroughs stories, really. Only Edgar Rice Burroughs could do that. Now, like I say, this is a term we hear mostly nowadays regarding television, actually. Television shows like the Star Wars television shows and the Star Wars movies that came after, they were sold to Disney. And Star Trek. Gene Roddenberry is long gone, the creator of Star Trek, but Star Trek goes on. And most recently, there's that Lord of the Rings series on Amazon that is terrible. I watched 2 episodes of that, and it is just the worst. That series sucks. Anyway, so we know that has nothing to do with Tolkien. And I think we all realize that. It's just, it's just billion-dollar fan fiction, basically. I've heard it most recently, I guess, because of Star Trek. Star Trek, which started off as one show, grew into many shows, and is just a whole thing now. Recently, they came out with the series Strange New Worlds, which some of my BookTube friends and I have been talking about on Voxer. And you see a lot of, if you're into Star Trek, you could see Star Trek videos and things where people discuss canon all the time. Now, the problem with Strange New Worlds is it takes place pretty much right before Captain Kirk took over the Enterprise. It was Pike's Enterprise. Captain Pike had the Enterprise for a while. And Spock was on his ship. And Uhura was too, apparently. But Strange New Worlds takes place before the original Star Trek series. And it's supposed to be official canon Star Trek. Of course, the problem is there's a bunch of things, and this is nothing against the show, because I actually think Strange New Worlds is a really good show. I enjoy it quite a bit. Everything works on that show, basically. The cast is great. The writing's really good. It's an excellent show. But they do a lot of things in that show that doesn't fit with the original series. Spock was never meant to be a romantic lead who kisses all the women all the time. But they have made Spock a romantic lead on that show, pretty much. And they've done things with that character that just would never happen on the old show, because it flies in the face of what we saw in the original series. And there were other things like the Gorns, who nobody knew who they were in the original show, and here they're like a major thing that everybody seems to know about. There are things like that. Now, does that really matter? To me, it doesn't matter as much, because it's TV, you know. And for some reason, I forgive that kind of stuff, really. But I can watch that show, and in my mind, it's just an alternate reality of Star Trek. According to the company that owns Star Trek, or the corporation, these are all owned by corporations, it's official, even though it doesn't work from a storytelling perspective. But it's official, and it bothers a lot of people. Same goes with Star Wars. I don't know why I'm so forgiving with Star Wars. I'm one of those crazy Star Wars fans who liked the prequel movies, so don't listen to me. What the hell do I know when it comes to Star Wars? I pretty much like everything Star Wars. I figured if I could forgive Star Wars the Ewoks, I could forgive Star Wars anything, pretty much. And again, it could be because I don't take television shows or movies as seriously as I do books. Part of that, I think, is because books, with the exception of the work done by editors, and maybe an editor forces you to change something in your story, or a publisher forces you to change something in your story, that'll happen. But otherwise, it's pretty much an individual creation. As an author, you created this, and it's yours as far as that goes. You might go along with changing things to get it published, but it's yours. A television show or a movie, that's something created by many people. The director alone didn't create it. The writers didn't create it by themselves. It's a bunch of people that are creating this stuff, not just one individual. And so maybe that's the reason I give that kind of stuff a pass. And maybe it's just because I'm more into books than I am into television. But does canon matter? I think to a certain extent it does, particularly when it comes to books and literature, something that was created by one person, more or less. An author's work should be respected. And I think as far as books are concerned, it's pretty clear-cut. Television, movies, it's almost moot, you know, and the same thing goes with comic books, you know, another medium where a bunch of people are creating this stuff now. The original creators of comic book characters, unfortunately, usually sold those rights to these companies or corporations early on and lost control of their characters. Superman's a famous case of that. The same thing. Canon is a mess. In DC Comics, for example, it's just a horrific mess. Just don't even try to figure out what really happened in DC, because you never will. It's impossible. So to a certain extent, it depends on us, you know, as consumers of this entertainment. How much does it matter, and does it matter? Again, when it comes to books, I think it really matters. But I guess that's all I have to say about it today. What do you think? Let me know. I'll shut up now, and I will catch you next time.